Hello, we're reading from racial and ethnic groups. One of the things that I like to do is deal with concepts here. I want to deal with the concepts underneath things. And the only way we're going to be able to work our way out of the mess that we're in, the collapse that we're in, the only way we're going to be able to build anything is to understand the concepts that undergirds every aspect of our lives. And so we were dealing with subordinate groups and what happens to them. We're up to segregation. Segregation is the physical separation of two groups in residence, workplace, and social functions. Generally, the dominant group imposes segregation on the subordinate group. Segregation is rarely complete, however, intergroup contact inevitably occurs even in the most segregated societies. Sociologists Douglas Massey and Nancy Denton wrote American Apartheid, which describes segregation in U.S. cities based on 1990 data. The title of their book was meant to indicate that neighborhoods in the United States resembled the segregation of the rigid government-imposed racial segregation that prevailed for so long in the Republic of South Africa. South Africa got their segregation program from us. So that's not a surprise. Analyzing the 2000 census, results show little change despite growing racial and ethnic diversity in the nation. Sociologists measure racial segregation using a segregation index or index of dissimilarity. The index ranges from 0 to 100 given the percentage of a group that would have to move to achieve even residential patterns. For example, Atlanta has an index of 65.6 for black-white segregation, which means that about 66% of either blacks or whites would have to move so that each small neighborhood or census tract would have the same racial balance as the metropolitan area as a whole. This talks about the figures that they have in the book. It's old, so we're not going to go there. The book's old. Concepts are there, but the data is 20 years old, so you'd have to update it. Overall, the least segregated metropolitan areas tend to be those with smallest African American populations. For Latinos, the separation patterns are similar, with the highest pattern of isolation occurring in the cities with the larger number of Hispanics. There has been little change in overall levels of racial and ethnic segregation from 1990 to 2000. I'm sure it's the same. But go check out the new numbers. Go check out, just put in racial and ethnic segregation 2020. See what happens when you search. Similarly, Asian white segregation remains high and showed little change during the 1990s. This focus on metropolitan areas should not cause us to ignore the continuing legally sanctioned segregation of Native Americans on reservations. Although the majority of our nation's first inhabitants live outside these tribal areas, the reservations play a prominent role in the identity of Native Americans. Although it's easier to maintain tribal identity on the reservation, economic and educational opportunities are more limited in these areas segregated from the rest of society. The social consequences of residential segregation are significant, given the elevated rates of poverty experienced by racial and ethnic minorities. Their patterns of segregation mean that the consequences of poverty, dismal job opportunities, poor healthcare facilities, delinquency, and crime are much more likely to be experienced by even the middle-class blacks, Latinos, and tribal people than it is by middle-class whites. Fusion. Fusion occurs when a minority of the majority group combine to form a new group. This combining can be expressed as A plus B plus C to D, where A, B, and C represent the groups present in a society, and D signifies the result. An ethnocultural racial group sharing some of the characteristics of each initial group. Mexicans are an example of fusion, originating as they do out of the mixing of the Spanish and indigenous Indian cultures. Theoretically, fusion does not entail intermarriage, but it is very similar to amalgamation, or the process by which a dominant group or a subordinate group combine through intermarriage into a new people. In everyday speech, the words fusion and amalgamation are already used, but the concept is expressed in the notion of a human melting pot, in which diverse racial or ethnic groups form a new creation, a new cultural entity. The analogy of the cauldron, the melting pot, was first used to describe the United States by the French observer Crevecoeur or Crevecoeur, Crevecoeur. I should have looked up how to pronounce that. In 1782, the phrase dates back to the Middle Ages, when alchemists attempted to change less valuable metals into gold and silver. Similarly, the idea of the human melting pot implied that the new group would represent only the best qualities and the attributes of different cultures contributing to it. The belief in the United States as a melting pot became widespread in the early 20th century. This belief suggested that the United States had an almost divine mission to destroy artificial divisions and create a single kind of human. However, the dominant group had indicated its unwillingness to welcome such groups as Native Americans, Blacks, Hispanics, Jews, Asian, and Irish Roman Catholics into the melting pot. It is a mistake to think of the United States as an ethnic mixing bowl. Although there are superficial signs of fusion, as in cuisine that includes sauerkraut and spaghetti, most contributions of subordinate groups are ignored. Marriage patterns indicate the resistance to fusion. People are unwilling in varying degrees to marry outside their own ethnic, religious, or racial groups. Surveys show that 20 to 50% of various white ethnic groups report single ancestry. When white ethnics do cross boundaries, they tend to marry within their religion and social class. For example, Italians are more likely to marry Irish, who are also Catholic, than they are to marry Protestant Swedes. There is only modest evidence of a fusion of races in the United States. Racial intermarriage has been increasing, and the number of interracial couples immigrating to the United States has also grown. In 1980, there were 167,000 black-white couples, but by 2002, there were 395,000. I'm sure that number is very high. I have numerous members of my family that are in interracial couples, where when I was a teenager in my 20s, I had none. So, among couples in which at least one member is Hispanic, marriages with a non-Hispanic partner account for about 1 out of 4. So, those are some more of the issues with subordinate groups. We're going to continue to go through these issues, go through this. Like I said, this book is old, so the data's old, but the concepts underneath it are still there. And that's what we need to deal with if we're going to solve the problems in this society. Or, I should say, the problems have been laid bare if we're going to build a society that is sane. So, until next time, I thank you for your support. Take care of your mind, take care of your body, and be safe.